Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is May Marvell. I'm an artist, writer, and autistic and mental health advocate living in Portland, Oregon. So today we're going to be talking about the Judge Rotenberg Center and their history of abuse, which unfortunately continues to this very day. I want to warn you up front that this video is going to contain some very upsetting and disturbing information detailing their history of abuse. I completely understand if this is not a video that you want to watch or feel comfortable watching, so if this is not for you, please feel free to click away now and we'll see you in the next video. So when I first started researching this, I really had no idea just how much was going on with this place. They have had a history of abuse since day one, and somehow are still in operation to this day. The things you'll hear throughout this video may sound shocking or even unbelievable at times, but this is the gross truth of a school abusing children in the name of treatment. So without further ado, let's dive in. The Judge Rotenberg Center is located in Canton, Massachusetts. It's a 50-year-old privately owned but publicly funded residential day school enrolling students with autism, psychiatric conditions, and intellectual disabilities. The center provides behavioral treatment using methodologies of applied behavior analysis, ABA therapy. JRC's behavior modification program relies heavily on aversion therapy, with treatment directed exclusively towards promoting normalization. Aversives used to modify behavior include sleep deprivation, restraint, solitary confinement, and GED skin shocks. While the center often claims it only uses aversives as a last resort against self-harm and aggression, these claims have been refuted. Reports by multiple government agencies have found that the center regularly uses aversives on children with history of no self-harm or aggression, and often for only minor infractions. And aside from the obvious moral issues here, there is a medical consensus that positive-only support is both safer and more effective than the use of aversives. On March 6, 2020, the FDA banned the use of the electric shock devices to correct self-harming or aggressive behavior. This ban was nationwide, however, JRC is the only place that still uses this practice in the United States. And while that should have been the end of the abuse, or at least the GED electric shock abuse, they are still using the GED devices to this day. Due to court battles and the pandemic, none of the 55 residents currently approved for treatment with this device will be required to transition off until further legal decisions have been made. This school has a history of abuse since its inception, and they have time and time again successfully evaded the ban of aversives or complete shutdown, despite the fact that in 2013 the UN declared that the use of the GED device violated the United Nations Convention Against Torture. It is astounding that this institution has managed to remain open for all of these years. If their past is any indication, it could be years before they're finally legally required to cease the use of the GED shock devices. That's why it's so important to draw attention to this issue and demand that they stop the shocks now. In 1971, a horrible human being by the name of Matthew Israel founded the center, which was originally called the Behavior Research Institute, BRI. In 1975, the BRI expanded to group homes in Massachusetts, and in 1976 it opened another branch in California. Israel opened the California branch of the BRI without a license to operate a group home, without a license to practice psychology in the state of California, and without a license to use aversives or punishments. Regardless of this, the Institute used aversives on their residents anyways. When the Institute finally applied for a license to operate in 1977, the California Health Department rejected the application, citing lack of meaningful peer review and unnecessary use of painful aversives. The department also found that there was insufficient evidence to show that Israel was even reputable or responsible, or that he could actually have the ability to comply with the regulations. So without a license, the center was scheduled to be shut down. But the day after the scheduled shutdown, a group of horribly misguided parents reopened the institute as a co-op and changed Israel's position from executive director to consultant. Now, this dude should not be consulting anyone on anything, but especially nothing to do with children. The organization then changed its name to the Behavior Research Institute of California and applied for a license to operate a group home and a permit to use aversives. With the aid of then California Governor Pat Brown, whose law firm was hired to represent the center, they received the license to operate, as well as the only permit ever granted by the state of California for a group home to use physical aversives on its residents. To make things worse, the institute was awarded $35,000 per year per child by the state, which is the highest rate of any community facility in California. So basically, they were profiting off the state for abusing children. After the death of a resident in 1981, the state of California launched an investigation into the institute and its practices. The investigation revealed various abuses against the residents, both physical and psychological. Residents were beaten, restrained, humiliated, and not adequately fed or cared for. Residents often bore extreme bruising, which staff had been trained to conceal from both doctors and family. As a result of the investigation, the institute was banned from using physical aversives, as well as using restraints and withholding meals as punishment. Additionally, Matthew Israel was banned from entering the facility. But fear not, because Judy Weber is about to save the day. Judy Weber, who was the mother of one of the Institute's residents, took over the operations of the center right away, and then later renamed it Tobin World. It is very worth noting that Judy here went on to become Israel's second wife. As early as 1979, authorities in New York State had published 2 reports on the Behavior Research Institute, which showed signs of physical and mental abuse. One report found that the Institute's methods were only effective through means of coercion, and that residents relapsed into their old behavior as soon as the immediate threat of punishment was gone. While corporal punishment was against the law in Massachusetts, the Institute was granted special permission to use aversives in 1983. Why do these states that have never allowed these types of things before keep giving this institution the go-ahead for torture? I do not understand at all. And especially, these institutes are for children. They're called schools. In 1985, Vincent Malott, a 22-year-old autistic man, died at the Institute. He had been restrained and forced to wear a white noise-emitting sensory deprivation helmet when he died of asphyxiation after suffering an epileptic seizure. Vincent had a history of epileptic seizures and had been made to wear the helmet as a punishment for making inappropriate sounds. The judge who presided over the hearing on Vincent's death declared that the staff doctors were negligent for approving the therapy, and that the center's director, Matthew Israel, had been negligent for authorizing the helmet's use in the first place. Vincent's mother said that she did not want charges to be pressed against the Institute, but she did sue JRC for $10 million. Soon after the death of Vincent, the Massachusetts Office of Children issued an order to close the center. BRI countersued the Office of Children, and after seeing the Institute's presentation of one of his worst self-harming residents, Judge Ernest Rotenberg, Judge Rotenberg sided with BRI. In the settlement that followed, the Office of Children agreed to pay $580,000 to BRI in legal fees. The head of the Office of Children later resigned and was sued by a group of parents for $15 million, who claimed that her attempt to shut down the center was a violation of their children's rights. I honestly cannot with these parents. These parents are literally fighting for the right for this institute to abuse their children. In 1993, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Retardation, that's what it was called, said that the school had repeatedly failed to comply with a number of state regulations and threatened to take away its certification. A judge described the case as a war of harassment against Michael Israel and ruled against the case to close the center, and ordered the state to pay $1.5 million to JRC in compensation for legal fees and other costs. Additionally, he stripped the agency of its power to regulate the center and awarded it to the courts. The commissioner of the Department of Mental Retardation was forced to resign. We're talking about the abuse of children here. You have got to be kidding me with these judges continually siding with JRC. In 1994, the center changed its name to the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, as it's still known today. This name was chosen to honor the memory of the judge who helped preserve the program from extinction at the hands of the state licensing officials in the 1980s. Gross. So gross. The Judge Rotenberg Center moved from its original location near Providence, Rhode Island, to its current facilities in Canton, Massachusetts in 1996. In 2011, Israel was forced to resign his position as director of Judge of the Rotenberg Center as part of a deferred prosecution agreement after being indicted on criminal charges related to the abuse of residents. And 6 residents have died of preventable causes at the center since it opened in 1971. But somehow, this place is still going strong to this day. As a result of the 2011 ruling by the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care, Governor Devil Patrick's administration imposed regulations that only residents whose treatment plans approved the GED, electric shock devices, before that time were still permitted to receive it. But new residents enrolled into JRC were no longer allowed to, by law, receive the GED as part of their plan. But Jesus Christ, why are we allowing it at all? On anyone? This is still just flat out torture, and even in 2011, there was not a ban on these devices. If you want to know who else to be mad at, the Massachusetts Department of Developmental Services is responsible for providing the JRC with its license to use adversives, including electric shocks. I'm just going to leave this right here. Okay, so we're getting into some even heavier stuff here, so just a forewarning, we're going to be speaking about the different types of abuse that JRC has been found to take part in. In 1979, a staff member resigned and asked the district attorney to file child abuse charges against the institute, alleging that he had observed abuse while he was there. On the prompting of various former staff members, residents, and concerned family members, the California Department of Social Services finally launched an investigation into the institution. The ensuing investigation revealed various abuses by the institute, including improper and unsafe use of restraints, punishments designed to humiliate residents, failure to provide proper nutrition, failure to provide proper medical care, and severe bruising, lacerations, and scars from adversive treatments. In a 1982 report of the investigation, the California Department of Social Services documented various violations and abuses that occurred at the institute. Investigations found that residents had received excessive bruises from excessive and unnecessary adversives. Residents had cuts, scars, scabs, and open wounds from the use of adversives. Furthermore, staff took action to disguise these injuries from doctors and family members. Doctors' appointments were sometimes postponed due to the presence of excessive bruising, and aversive interventions were put on hold before scheduled visits with family members for public relations purposes. Residents were made to wear long sleeves to cover up injuries, and social service employees were on some occasions denied the right to adequately inspect them for bruises. Residents were often put in positions where there was no way for them to avoid receiving an aversive. For example, a deaf child being punished for failing to comply with verbal commands. Residents were also forced to take part in behavioral rehearsal lessons, where they were punished regardless of whether they behaved correctly or not. Additionally, residents were regularly spanked for crying in response to punishment. The report found that at least one resident's behavior substantially worsened at the institute due to improper treatment and unprofessional use of adversives. The report found that staff pinched residents to make them repeat phrases uttered by staff, and threatened residents with the use of adversives if they did not comply with the staff's arbitrary demands. One resident was made to eat dinner outside with his arms restrained by his sides from a plate of food that had been placed on the ground. Other residents were deprived of the right to sleep in a bed. One was forced to sleep in a kneeling position while tied to a piece of furniture. Residents were sometimes made to even soil themselves when staff refused to let them use the bathroom. Residents were restrained for punishment as well as for the personal convenience of the staff. Residents were restrained in unsafe ways and sometimes received cuts and bruises. In 1981, a 14-year-old boy died at the institute while restrained face down on a 4-point board. The institute was not authorized to use restraints on any of its residents at this time, and continued to do so even after being informed that it was against the law. The institute was found to have removed records, making them inaccessible to investigators and family. Furthermore, they were found to have denied the right to review records to family members and investigators. In many cases, the institute's records were completely inaccurate. Examples include denying a resident food as punishment while recording that they had in fact been fed, recording that restraints had been checked when they had not been, and failing to properly record the administration of aversives. The Institute retaliated against people who complained about their practices and refused to let the Department of Social Services investigate those complaints. Parents were told that their children would be expelled if they questioned or complained about the Institute. But personally, if I was a parent, I wouldn't see any desire to keep my child there in the first place. The investigation found that residents were provoked into violent and aggressive behavior as part of the filming of a before and after video to promote the center, where staged clips of residents responded to provocation were shown as examples of how they had behaved before the treatment. Then residents were taken off aversive therapy, rewarded heavily for several days, and asked to perform only tasks that placed very little demand on them, so a video could be produced to show how they behaved after treatment. This film was then shown to the parents of prospective residents and to reporters to falsely convince them of the benefits of the Institute. One of the reasons that the JRC has come back into the public light is the resurfacing of a video from 2002 in which an autistic teenager from New York City named Andre McCollins was restrained on a 4-point board and shocked 31 times over the course of 7 hours. The first shock was given simply because he refused to take off his coat when he was asked. Subsequent shocks were given as punishments for screaming and tensing up while being shocked, as anyone would. In the video, which I will not show here, I have seen some of it and it's extremely difficult to watch. Andre can be heard shouting, "Someone help me, please." The JRC staff considered him screaming for help to be major disruptive behavior, for which he was administered even more shocks. Andre's mother had to drive him to the hospital the next day as he was unable to speak and had burns over much of his body. The doctor diagnosed him with acute stress disorder, which was a direct result of the center's aversives. His mother subsequently claimed that there is no counseling for residents there, and that the staff there lied to her for all these years. In 2012, when the video of this incident was released as part of a lawsuit by Andre's mother, the video aired on national news and caught the attention of the hacker group Anonymous, which announced in a YouTube video that the center and those affiliated with it were targets. Anonymous hacked JRC's website, retrieved confidential information about individuals and groups associated with it, and posted that information to Pastebin. The doxed information included the names and addresses of the center's sponsors, lobbyists, lawyers, supporters, and founder. There was an incident in which staff received a phone call alleging that 2 residents had misbehaved earlier in the evening. In response to this, the staff immediately woke them from their beds, restrained them, and repeatedly gave them electric shocks. One of the residents received 77 shocks, and the other received 29. After the incident, one of the residents had to be treated for burns. The phone call was later found to be a hoax perpetrated by a former resident who was pretending to be a supervisor. In December 2007, the center was found by the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care to have been abusive towards residents and had failed to protect their health. The incident led to 2 investigations, one by the federal government and one by the state of Massachusetts. While the investigation was ongoing, Matthew Israel ordered the tapes be destroyed, despite a court order to keep them. In May 2011, Israel was indicted on charges of child endangerment, acting as an accessory after the fact, and obstruction of justice for misleading a grand jury over the JRC's destruction of tapes. In 2011, Israel was forced to resign his position at JRC in a deferred prosecution plea deal with the Massachusetts State Attorney General's office. And somehow, after all this guy is still not in jail, to this day. A majority of the residents at the JRC are Black and Latinx, and from outside of the state. These demographics highlight the Judge Rotenberg Center as but one intersection in our nation's dark history of education networks, where disabled youth of color are consistently more likely to experience the traumatic or even deathly effects of being physically punished, restrained, or forced into seclusion at schools. I am so unbelievably disturbed and upset that we even have to have a section on deaths at this facility. However, 6 residents have died at the Institute since it was founded in 1971. And yet somehow, again, this facility is still in operation to this day. In addition to Vincent Militic, the 22-year-old autistic man we learned about earlier, there was also Robert Cooper. Robert Cooper was 25 years old when he died from a bowel obstruction after BRI failed to provide him with medical treatment before his condition became fatal. However, the state never found nor held BRI responsible for his death. Danny Oswald was a 14-year-old autistic boy who died at the Behavior Research Institute in 1981 while restrained face down to a bed. The institute was not authorized to use restraints on its residents at this time. Danny had previously had a rod surgically implanted in his back to treat a degenerative back disease that had resulted from his treatment there. The coroner's report concluded that Danny had died of mental retardation and cerebral malformation and recorded that his death was from natural causes. Abigail Gibson was a 29-year-old woman with a seizure disorder who was detained at the Behavioral Research Institute and subject to regular physical aversives by the program. She suffered a heart attack in her room at night and died 2 days later at the Sturdy Memorial Hospital in 1987. Linda Cornelison was a 19-year-old nonverbal and intellectually disabled resident of the Institute who died in 1990 of complications related to a gastric perforation. At the time of her death, Linda was on a contingent food program where food was withheld as punishment for undesired behavior. In the days leading up to her death, Linda's expressions of pain were interpreted as misbehavior by staff, who administered 56 physical aversives over 5 hours before calling an ambulance. Linda was already unconscious when the ambulance finally arrived. An investigation of Linda's death conducted by the Massachusetts Department of Mental Retardation reported that the treatment was inhumane beyond all reason and violated universal standards of human decency, but failed to find enough evidence to link JRC to Linda's death. However, a Massachusetts court found in 1995 that JRC had exhibited negligence. At the time of her death, Linda had been a resident of the Institute for 7 years and had been subjected to 88,719 adversives. Silverio Gonzalez was a disabled 16-year-old who died in the Institute's custody in 1998. He was housed there for 11 months before making an attempt to free himself by jumping from a transport bus. He died from head trauma from the fall. His mother, Olga, sued the center after his death. That is 6 deaths that absolutely did not need to happen. And the fact that this place is allowed to continue to operate and shock and restrain and starve and otherwise abuse its students, many of whom are autistic or disabled, in the name of treatment and under protection of the law is just, it's fucking repulsive. This needs to stop. We cannot wait until another child dies. We need to stop the shocks now. The autistic community has reignited the Stop the Shocks campaign to try to get JRC to stop shocking its students immediately. And while that's a wonderful campaign that I am happy to be a part of, honestly, this school needs to be shut down, and it needs to be shut down now. Attempts to shut down or cripple the school at the legislative level have been made in every legislative session since the late 1980s. However, none have passed due to a combination of lobbying from the JRC, who, by the way, spent over $77 million on lobbying in 2019 alone. And the worst proponents are the parents that protest the school closing. At one time, a group of parents sued the state for $15 million, contending that the state's attempt to close the institute violated their children's right to treatment. Such a big part of the reason that this place is still running is because of these parents fighting for the right to have someone abuse their child. I mean, that's exactly what it is. There's no way around it. How? How, as a parent, could you possibly fight for that? Could you possibly continue to advocate for a place like this? Any parent who advocates for this place should have their child taken away from them. And I mean that 100%. Anyone who advocates for abuse should not be anywhere near a child, and most certainly should not be legally responsible for them. Massachusetts State Senator and disgusting excuse for a human being, Jeffrey Sánchez, whose nephew Brandon has been detained at the center since 1992, is a major proponent of the JRC and its practices. Sánchez has repeatedly blocked the passage of legislation that would threaten the center. In comparison, Massachusetts State Senator Brian Joyce tried repeatedly during his tenure in office to close the center down, but unfortunately without any success. There have been many attempts to shut the center down by autism rights advocates, disability advocates, and human rights advocates, all without any success. Now I know that I am just one person, but I have created a petition to request that the school be shut down immediately. I will link that petition down in the description below, and I ask that you please take a few moments to sign it and to share it. We need to at least try to bring as much attention to this issue as we possibly can. And maybe, just maybe, we can make some changes here. Maybe we can get this place shut down, or maybe at the very least we can get them to stop the shocks. This has been a really difficult video to research and to film. It was very dark, and a lot of it was very difficult to learn, especially because so much of this abuse continues to this day. If you did make it to the end, thank you for sticking with me. Please consider sharing this video to help educate others on the issues at the Judge Rotenberg Center. And please like, comment, and subscribe to help more people see this video and to be notified of the next video I post. If you would like to see more of my work, you can find the links for my website, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter down below. If you'd like to support my work, you can also find my Patreon. Thank you all, and I'll see you next time.